Silent Night. I didn't expect to spend Christmas Eve alone. My family was supposed to visit, but a storm warning had shut down the highways. My friends all had plans with their own families, and the few coworkers I liked had scattered for the holidays. So, it was just me in my little house, surrounded by snowdrifts and silence. It wasn't all bad. I had a roaring fire, a bottle of wine, and an old stack of Christmas movies I planned to binge. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, but the cozy glow of the living room kept it at bay, at least for a while. The first strange thing happened around 8 p.m. I was curled up on the couch, halfway through Home Alone, when I heard it, a faint chime like the tinkling of bells. I muted the TV and listened. The sound came again, soft and distant. It was coming from outside. Curious, I got up and peered through the frost-covered window. The snow-covered yard stretched out under the dim light of the street lamp. There was no one there, no sign of movement. Shrugging it off as a trick of the wind, I returned to the couch. But the sound came again, louder this time. It wasn't the wind. It was unmistakably bells, jingling in a slow, deliberate rhythm. They sounded closer now, like someone was walking toward the house. I turned off the TV, suddenly aware of how quiet the room had become. The wind had died down, leaving only the sound of those eerie bells. "Hello," I called, my voice shaky. The bells stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, just as I convinced myself I'd imagined it, there came a knock at the door. It was soft, almost polite, but in the stillness of the night, it might as well have been a gunshot. I crept toward the door, every nerve in my body screaming to stay back. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling. No answer. The knock came again, louder this time. Peering through the peephole, I expected to see a neighbor or maybe someone stranded in the storm. But the porch was empty. I opened the door just a crack, the cold air biting at my face. Snow swirled under the dim porch light, but there was no one there. And yet, at the foot of the steps, I saw something strange. A single set of footprints, leading from the street to my door. They stopped abruptly at the porch. I shut the door quickly, locking it and sliding the chain across. Something about those footprints bothered me. They weren't boot prints, not the kind you'd expect in this weather. They were long and thin with sharp points at the toes, almost like claws. I shook my head, trying to dispel the image. "It's just the storm messing with me," I muttered, turning back toward the living room. But as I stepped into the hallway, I stopped dead. The fire had gone out. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the Christmas tree lights. The warmth was gone, replaced by an icy chill that seemed to seep into my bones. And then I saw it. The front door, which I just locked, was wide open. Panic set in as I backed away, my eyes darting around the room. The wind whipped through the open door, carrying with it the faint sound of jingling bells. I grabbed the poker from the fireplace and edged toward the door. "Whoever's out there, you need to leave," I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. But there was no response, only the endless, rhythmic sound of the bells. I slammed the door shut again, locking it and bracing a chair against it for good measure. My breath came in ragged gasps, my hands shaking as I clutched the poker. This wasn't normal. Someone was messing with me, or worse. And then I heard it, a low, guttural chuckle, came from the living room. I turned slowly, the blood draining from my face. The Christmas tree lights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. And standing in the corner, half hidden in the darkness, was a figure. It was tall and hunched, its limbs impossibly long. Its skin was pale and mottled, like wax left too close to a flame. And its face was obscured by a twisted, grinning mask, the kind you'd find in a nightmare version of a holiday parade. It tilted its head, watching me with unblinking eyes. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the poker. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. And then, slowly, it raised one skeletal hand and pointed. to the Christmas tree. My eyes followed its gesture, and my stomach turned. The ornaments were moving. At first, I thought it was the light playing tricks on me. But no, the ornaments were definitely shifting, twisting and writhing as if alive. And then, one by one, they began to fall, shattering on the floor in a cascade of broken glass. The figure chuckled again, a sound that sent ice down my spine. "Stop it!" I shouted, gripping the poker tighter. "Get out of my house!" The figure stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. With each step, the room seemed to grow darker, the air heavier. Desperation took over. I swung the poker, but it passed through the figure as if it weren't there. It laughed, a hollow, echoing sound, and pointed again, this time at me. The lights on the tree went out, plunging the room into complete darkness. I stumbled back, my breath coming in panic gasps, and then I felt it. Cold, bony fingers brushed against my arm. I screamed, swinging wildly, but there was nothing there. The bells started again, louder now, deafening in the confined space. When the lights came back on, the figure was gone. The room was exactly as it had been before. Fire roaring, tree glowing, the scent of pine and cinnamon filling the air. But I wasn't alone. Under the tree, nestled among the wrapped presents, was a small red box. It hadn't been there before. I didn't want to touch it. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run and never look back. But something compelled me to approach, to kneel before the tree and reach for the box. My hands trembled as I untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside was a single piece of paper folded neatly. I unfolded it, my breath hitching as I read the words scrawled in jagged, black letters. "See you next year. I haven't celebrated Christmas since." A silent night. I had always loved Christmas. The lights, the music, the comforting smell of pine and cinnamon. There was a magic to it, a warmth that chased away the cold of winter. But this year was different. This year I was alone. I hadn't planned it that way. My parents were visiting relatives in another state. My sister was snowed in with her husband up north, and I told my friends I needed some time to myself. They didn't press. Everyone knew I'd been struggling since the breakup. So here I was, in the small apartment I'd barely decorated, nursing a cup of cheap wine by the faint glow of the tree. Outside, the snow fell steadily, muffling the world in an eerie quiet. It was peaceful, or at least it should have been. Instead, something felt off. It started with the power. The lights flickered once, twice, and then the apartment was plunged into darkness. The hum of the fridge stopped, the faint buzz of the Christmas tree lights gone. Only the soft glow of the street lamp outside kept the room from being pitch black. I groaned, setting my wine glass down. "Perfect," I muttered, fumbling for my phone. The flashlight app did its job, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. I made my way to the kitchen, hoping to find some candles. But as I rummaged through the drawers, I heard it. A faint sound, barely audible over the wind. A knock. I froze, the matches slipping from my fingers. It wasn't the kind of knock you'd expect at a door. No, it was softer, more deliberate, like someone tapping with a single knuckle. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It had come from the window. I turned slowly, my heart pounding. The window in the living room faced the street, 3 stories up. No one could be out there, could they? "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. I edged closer to the window, the beam of my flashlight trembling as it illuminated the glass. Snow clung to the pane, and beyond it, the street was empty. I sighed in relief. "Just my imagination," I muttered, turning back toward the kitchen. The knock came again. This time it was louder. My heart leapt into my throat as I whipped around. The window was still empty, the snow outside undisturbed. But the knocking didn't stop. Came again and again, faster now, more insistent. And then I realized it wasn't coming from the living room window. It was coming from the bedroom. I didn't want to go. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But the knocking continued, relentless and maddening. Clutching my flashlight like a weapon, I crept down the hall. The door to my bedroom was ajar, the darkness inside impenetrable. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, from the darkness, a voice answered. "Let me in." It wasn't a voice I recognized. It was high-pitched and raspy, like the sound of wind scraping against glass. My stomach turned. I stepped back, gripping the flashlight tighter. "Who are you?" I asked, forcing the words out. "Let me in," the voice repeated, softer this time, almost pleading. I turned and bolted for the front door. My hands fumbled with the lock, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The snowstorm outside was brutal, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out, away from whatever was in my apartment. But as I pulled the door open, I froze. There was someone standing on the other side. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. His face was gaunt, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. He wore a tattered red coat, the kind Santa Claus might wear, but it was filthy, the white trim stained yellow and brown. His eyes were the worst part. They were sunken and black, like two empty sockets, and they were staring straight at me. "Merry Christmas," he rasped, his lips curling into a grotesque smile. I slammed the door and locked it. I backed away, my hands shaking. The man didn't knock, didn't shout, didn't do anything. I pressed my ear to the door, listening for any sign of movement. Nothing. I turned back to the living room, my mind racing. This had to be some kind of prank, right? Someone messing with me because they knew I was alone. That made sense. That was logical. But the knock came again. This time, it was at the living room window. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see that face again. But some morbid curiosity pulled me toward the window. He was there, standing in the snow, staring up at me. His head tilted to one side, like he was studying me. And then he raised a hand and pointed at the bedroom door. I stumbled back, my heart hammering. The flashlight flickered, casting wild shadows across the walls. The bedroom door was still ajar, the darkness inside unnerving. "Go away!" I screamed, my voice cracking. But the man didn't move. He just kept pointing, his expression unchanging. And then, slowly, the bedroom door began to creak open. I turned and ran, not caring where I went. The hallway stretched on endlessly, the shadows closing in around me. My legs felt like lead, my lungs burning with every breath. The knocking followed me, relentless and echoing. When I finally stopped, I was back in the living room. But something was wrong. The tree was gone. The furniture was gone. Even the walls seemed to have disappeared, replaced by endless black. And in the center of it all stood the man in the red coat. "You shouldn't have stayed alone," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. He stepped closer, his bony hand reaching out. "Christmas isn't meant to be spent alone," he whispered. "Don't you know? That's when we find you." The last thing I remember is his touch, ice cold and burning all at once. When I woke up, it was Christmas morning. The apartment was quiet, the tree back in its place, the lights twinkling cheerfully. But I wasn't alone. In the corner of the room, beneath the tree, was a gift. A small, red box tied with a black ribbon. I haven't opened it yet, and I don't think I ever will. The longest night. I never thought spending Christmas alone would feel this isolating. It was supposed to be peaceful, a break from the chaos of family gatherings, gift-wrapping marathons, and overplayed carols. This year, I'd chosen solitude, retreating to my late uncle's cabin deep in the woods. The idea was to decompress, enjoy some hot cocoa by the fire, and maybe finish that novel I'd been putting off. But as the wind howled outside, rattling the frost-covered windows, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The cabin was old, with creaky wooden floors and a fireplace that seemed determined to let the cold in. It was cozy in theory, but now, under the weight of the silent, snowy wilderness, it felt like the walls were pressing closer. The only sounds were the crackling fire and the occasional groan of the wind. It was just past midnight when I noticed the first strange thing. I was sitting in the armchair by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, when I saw something move outside. A shadow flickered across the window, quick and deliberate, like someone darting past. I froze, staring at the frosted glass. The snowstorm had buried the entire area in several feet of snow. No one should be out there. Probably just a branch, I muttered, trying to convince myself. But as I got up to check, I noticed something that sent a chill through me. There were footprints in the snow outside. They started at the edge of the forest and led straight to the cabin. I locked the door and double-checked the windows, my heart pounding. Could have been a hiker, lost in the storm. Maybe they needed help. That was the logical explanation, right? Still, the footprints unnerved me. They were deep, as if whoever made them was carrying something heavy. And they stopped right beneath the window I had been sitting by. I tried to shake it off and went back to the fire, but the uneasy feeling lingered. My eyes kept darting to the window, half expecting to see a face pressed against the glass. When the knock came, I almost screamed. It was soft at first, barely audible over the wind. A faint tapping like knuckles against wood. I stood frozen, staring at the door. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. No response. The knock came again, louder this time. Against my better judgment, I approached the door. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing but swirling snow. "Is someone out there?" I asked. Still no answer. I opened the door a crack, letting the icy wind rush in. The porch was empty, the footprints in the snow now completely erased by the storm. Shutting the door quickly, I locked it again. My hands were shaking as I turned back to the room. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The fire had gone out. I didn't understand how it could have happened. I just added fresh logs a few minutes ago. But now the fireplace was cold and dark, as if it hadn't been lit in hours. The temperature in the cabin plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs as I grabbed a flashlight and began fumbling with the matches. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, like someone whispering my name. "Stop it," I told myself. "You're just imagining things." But the sound came again, clearer this time. "Come outside," it whispered, the voice soft and sing-song, like a child's. I spun around, shining the flashlight into the corners of the room. It was empty, but the voice didn't stop. "Come outside," it repeated, more insistent now. I backed away, my heart racing. The flashlight flickered, then went out, plunging the room into darkness. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices now, all saying the same thing. "Come outside." I bolted for the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked the bedroom door and pushed a dresser in front of it for good measure. My phone was on the nightstand, but there was no signal this deep in the woods. The whispers continued, muffled now but still audible through the walls. I sat on the bed, clutching my phone like a lifeline. My flashlight had stopped working entirely, and the only light came from the moon, dimly illuminating the snow outside the window. That's when I saw it. A figure standing just beyond the tree line, barely visible in the pale light. It was tall and thin, its movements unnaturally jerky, like a puppet on strings. And it was holding something. I couldn't make out what it was at first, but as the figure stepped closer, I realized it was a sack. The figure stopped just outside the window, its face hidden in shadow. For a moment, it didn't move, as if it were waiting for something. Then, it raised a hand and pointed directly at me. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the bed. The whispers outside grew louder, more frantic. "Come outside," they chanted. "It's Christmas." The window began to frost over, the ice forming strange, intricate patterns, shapes that almost looked like faces. I grabbed the lamp from the nightstand and threw it at the window. The glass shattered, letting in a blast of freezing air. But the figure was gone. The chanting stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I stood there, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. And then I heard the front door creak open. I don't remember running. One moment I was in the bedroom, and the next I was outside, stumbling through the snow. The cold burned my skin, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. The forest was impossibly dark, the trees towering over me like silent sentinels. I didn't know where I was going. I just kept moving, the sound of crunching snow my only companion. But then I heard footsteps behind me. They were slow and deliberate, matching my pace no matter how fast I ran. I glanced over my shoulder and saw it, the figure from the cabin, now much closer. Its face was still obscured, but I could see its sack dragging behind it, leaving a deep trench in the snow. "Come back," it called, its voice echoing unnaturally through the trees. I tripped, falling face first into the snow. Scrambling to my feet, I realized the footsteps had stopped. When I turned around, the figure was gone. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, from the darkness, I heard the whispering again. "Come outside," it said, though I was already there. I never made it back to the cabin. I don't know if I ever will, but sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear them. Those soft, sing-song voices, calling me back to the longest night of my life. The silent night. Christmas Eve was always a quiet affair for me. Growing up as an only child, I learned to find peace in solitude. This year, I had decided to spend the holiday at my late grandmother's house. A quaint, creaky place nestled in a snowy forest. I hadn't been there in years, but I figured the change of scenery might be refreshing. The house was just as I remembered, with its antique furniture and an old fireplace that struggled to warm the frigid air. A towering Christmas tree stood in the corner, adorned with dusty ornaments that hadn't been touched since my grandmother's passing. The snowstorm outside raged on, the wind howling like a living thing. I sat on the couch, sipping hot chocolate and scrolling mindlessly on my phone. The silence of the house was comforting at first, but as the night wore on, it began to feel oppressive. The clock on the wall chimed midnight, its echo bouncing through the empty rooms. That's when I heard it, a faint knock at the front door. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. Who could possibly be out in this weather? The nearest neighbor was miles away, and the road leading to the house was buried under snow. The knock came again, louder this time. Setting my mug down, I approached the door cautiously. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. I hesitated before opening the door a crack. The cold wind rushed in, biting at my skin. But there was no one there, just an expanse of untouched snow stretching into the dark forest. Confused, I closed the door and locked it. It was probably just the wind, I told myself. As I turned away, I noticed something on the floor. A single snowflake, perfectly formed and impossibly delicate, melting on the rug. I tried to shake it off and went back to the couch. But the silence was heavier now, pressing against my ears. Every creak of the old house felt amplified. Every shadow stretched unnaturally long. And then I heard it, a faint jingling sound, like bells, coming from upstairs. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't been upstairs since arriving. The bedrooms had remained untouched, gathering dust since my grandmother's death. Grabbing a flashlight, I forced myself to climb the stairs. Each step groaned under my weight, the sound echoing in the stillness. The hallway was pitch black, save for the thin beam of light from my flashlight. The jingling grew louder as I approached the master bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness peeking through. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. The jingling stopped. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was as I remembered it. The four-poster bed, the heavy curtains, the wardrobe that always seemed to loom like a sentinel in the corner. But something was off. The mirror above the dresser was fogged, as if someone had been breathing on it. And on the bed lay an object that hadn't been there before. A small, wrapped gift, tied with a red bow. I stared at the gift, my hands trembling. Slowly, I reached out and untied the bow. The paper fell away to reveal an old-fashioned snow globe, the kind my grandmother used to collect. Inside was a miniature version of the house, complete with a tiny Christmas tree visible through the windows. As I shook it, snow swirled inside, settling gently over the scene. But then I noticed something chilling. In one of the tiny windows, there was a figure. a dark silhouette standing perfectly still, watching me. I dropped the globe, the glass shattering on the floor. The room instantly grew colder, the air heavy with the scent of pine and something metallic, like rust. And then I heard it. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, moving down the hallway toward me. My flashlight flickered, casting jagged shadows across the walls. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. I backed away, my pulse pounding in my ears. The doorknob began to turn, slowly at first, then with a violent jerk. The door flew open, slamming against the wall. But the hallway was empty. My flashlight went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. And then, a voice, soft and sing-song, like a child's, whispered from somewhere close. "Do you like your gift?" I bolted from the room, nearly tripping over the broken snow globe. My only thought was to get out of the house. I stumbled down the stairs, the air growing colder with every step. The front door was wide open, snow blowing in and covering the floor. But as I reached for it, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Behind me, the jingling bells started again, accompanied by faint laughter. I turned, my back pressed against the door. The Christmas tree in the corner was no longer dark. Its lights flickered to life, casting eerie, shifting colors across the room. And under the tree were more presents, dozens of them, all wrapped in the same paper as the snow globe. They hadn't been there before. One of the boxes began to move, its lid lifting slightly. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. The lid fell away, and a hand, pale, skeletal, and impossibly long, reached out. I screamed, yanking at the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The hand clawed at the air, followed by another, and then a head, a grotesque, grinning face with hollow eyes. "Stay with us," the voice whispered, now coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. The lights on the tree began to flicker faster, the colors bleeding together into a sickening whirl. The presents under the tree shook violently, their lids popping open to reveal more twisted shapes crawling out. I don't remember how I got the door open. One moment, I was trapped, and the next, I was outside, stumbling through the snow. The storm had stopped, the night eerily quiet. The house loomed behind me, its windows dark once more. But as I looked back, I saw them. Figures standing in the windows, watching me with hollow eyes. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. Even now, as I sit here, miles away from that cursed house, I can still feel the cold grip of that skeletal hand. And on the passenger seat beside me lies a single snowflake, perfectly formed and impossibly delicate.